Think we're live. Are we alive? Let me check.
Live on meeting is now live streaming, so I think we're live. Hello, this is another episode of New World Chaos. I am Jeff. This is Nemo, and we have our guest today, Jennifer Friend. And she is a friend of mine from CTA, Critical Therapy Antidote, and she is also the peer lead at the Counterweight Network. So I'm very pleased to have her here. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you, I guess.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. My first time on your podcast. So I could start by telling a little bit about my story and how I got involved with Critical Therapy Antidote and Counterweight, if that sounds good to you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been in the mental health field for about 30 years now, I think. And I'd been working at Fairfax County as a senior clinician for about 15 years. And I was doing case management and psychotherapy with clients with severe mental illness and substance use disorders. And the county adopted what they call a One Fairfax policy, which is their diversity, inclusion, equity policy. And it became a really negative experience shortly before George Floyd died, but then picked up very rapidly after his death. As I know that happened to a lot of people in their workplaces and in their schools. They really experienced a massive cultural shift right after his death. So the policy in Fairfax County actually started in 2017, but I didn't even know about it until 2020 when it was introduced in our staff meeting. But following the death of George Floyd, it became quite aggressive. We were getting frequent emails from management about things like microaggressions, telling us to do unconscious bias training, do one of those 21-day racial challenges where you read a bunch of articles about how, just the typical Robin DiAngelo stuff, white privilege, all of that, how everything in our culture is poisoned by white supremacy. And so there were some very, very racist, virulently, I would say just horrible things put on our county website, which was specifically for employees to learn more about racial equity. And I publicly opposed these things and quit. And I had actually been worried about this stuff happening in our culture for a while, because of course I was reading about it in the news, hearing about people being canceled, people losing their jobs for not adopting this ideology. And I had really hoped that my job was going to be safe from it. I was really enjoying my work with the clients. I planned to stay there until retirement. I was just a little under 6 years out from retirement with a full pension for life and subsidized health insurance benefits for life. And I walked away from all that because I felt that strongly about it. And I'll touch later on kind of what the whole situation that's happening in Fairfax County, but that's how I came to be involved with Counterweight and with Critical Therapy Antidote. While all of this was happening at my workplace, I was pinging videos to anybody and everybody that I could think of that I thought might be interested. I made videos of what was on the Fairfax County website, and I sent one of them to Helen Pletprose, from Counterweight, and her assistant, Carrie, reached out to me, and they began helping me and providing support. And it was a lifeline to me. It's very, as anyone knows who's gone through this, it's extremely isolating and alienating and very anxiety provoking to go up against your place of work. And I ended up becoming a volunteer, which has been the most wonderful experience ever. And what I've been doing is providing listening sessions to counterweight clients who have been struggling because of the imposition of critical race theory or critical social justice at their job or their school or their university. And then I came to Critical Therapy Antidote because I posted on Twitter that therapists really need to form some type of organization to protect the integrity of our profession. And somebody reached out to me and said, such a thing already exists. It's called Critical Therapy Antidote. And I immediately emailed and joined. And so thank God I found such wonderful organizations, because prior to that, I really felt like I was alone and I felt kind of like I was drowning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes sense. The difference in feeling isolated and alone and then connecting with some of these organizations. And it sounds like even the timeline of what you had been going through is eerily similar to my own, that I found out about Counterweight last year, probably sometime in almost like basically a year ago in May of 2020. And I think it was before George Floyd, and then George Floyd happened. It was just kind of funny timing, but something that I've been concerned about, that I've been hoping to make a difference in, and I really believe why me and Jeff focus so much on community building and relationships, is just the idea of all of these people that are in environments that are so allegiant to social justice. And it's actually been that way for a long time for a lot of people. And they probably feel trapped and alone. Or whether they, and even to some extent, it almost doesn't matter as much whether they believe in social justice or not, or if they're sympathetic or if they're skeptical, because people across that whole spectrum, it seems like if they're in those environments, pretty much everybody's convinced that that's just the way things are. Social justice won the culture war, and now it's the be all end all. And that's the end of the story. And I don't think that's true. So I'm hoping that through, stories like yours, where it's not just that you were screwed over, you actually took a stand and you found a way to make a positive impact and leave behind some of the rubble. And it sounds like you're even having really good, successful, big successes, even now that you've totally shifted your path. And I'm hoping that we can help as many people as possible have really turn things around and not just be trapped.
Yeah, I think that's what is part of what's so terrifying about this, because I can just say from my own perspective how I experienced it. So I'm a pretty conscientious person and I really like to do well at work. And so I exerted a lot of energy outside of all this critical social justice stuff. I exerted a lot of energy trying to make sure I did a good job, both for my clients, but also just, the stuff you have to do when you're at an organization, all of the paperwork, all of that kind of mundane stuff. I tried really, really hard to always do a good job, and to suddenly have something else come into that relationship with the employer that has nothing to do with your job function, where you're being asked not just to do your job and to do it well, but here, you need to adopt a specific set of beliefs. If you don't adopt them, you are not acceptable to us. You might be smeared as a racist. Accusations might be thrown at you, and we're certainly going to start looking at your performance less generously. It's really threatening to people because your employer, that's how you're paying your mortgage. That's how you're taking care of your family. If you have a family, that's how you get your health insurance. So to have that person try to control what you think and what you believe at the cost of maybe pulling away your resources or damaging your career or your professional reputation is very frightening for people. And people often feel very trapped, and understandably so. And they think, let me just kind of fly below the radar and not let people know that I disagree with this ideology. But even sometimes playing it safe doesn't work, because sometimes they come after you for not endorsing it enthusiastically enough, or maybe asking a perfectly innocent question.
Yes. Yeah. It's like there's a certain threshold in dysfunctional relationships that gets crossed, where if a person is obedient to the one who is more aggressive or dominating, if it's too dysfunctional, and that particular, the dominating person is going down a really bad path of like self-corruption, when you, as the other person in the relationship, then obey, I've noticed a person that's too far gone in this corruption, dominating, aggressiveness, etc., they'll actually get way worse. It's almost like you give them an inch, they take a mile, or like you open a Pandora's box to speeding up that downward spiral by, it's like they have no foundation if they have nothing that's pushing against them. And the metaphor that I used right before we went live, that I like this metaphor, was that a lot of people in social justice environments, they act as if they're trapped in a house they can't get out of. But I see it more as, in a lot of cases, it's actually the house, the foundation of it is crumbling and it's sinking into the ground. So instead of thinking they're trapped, they should be thinking, I need to make preparations and take care of this, because the house is not going to be here. It's either I sink with it or I get out and I make preparations. And I don't think a lot of people realize or understand the nature of the bad situation they're in. And I also noticed that in some of my efforts, being a blunt person and being more of a risk-taking person, that a lot of people are a little bit scared when I talk about these issues, because they don't want to think that it's as serious and bad as it is. So I think that's one of the reasons that people reinforce the ideology. In a lot of circumstances I've been in, I've lost so many friends, and I don't even know to what extent each friend is cutting off the friendship because they believe the ideology genuinely and they're like, I can't be friends with Nemo anymore, or if a lot of it's driven by fear and they want to play ostrich and stay in denial because they're afraid of vulnerability or groundlessness. And I even think that the fear of what could possibly go wrong is way worse than if you're actually in the situation going wrong. That's been my experience, and I'm a pretty big risk-taking person. But a lot of people, they never want to take even a small risk. So they build up these assumptions based on the boogie monsters in their minds. And so they never even get out there and dip their toes in the water to see what taking a risk would actually do in reality.
Well, they don't have to. They have all these safe spaces now. Like, taking a risk is antithetical to safety. And safety is, I was talking to Jen about this. Safety seems to be prioritized above anything. I don't know if in reality, but rhetorically, it's prioritized above everything nowadays. And they use safety as the umbrella that or the justification for a lot of the social justice acts that they take. And risk taking is completely antithetical. It's the complete opposite direction on the spectrum. So it's not a culture that's going to encourage risk taking. It's going to encourage the opposite of that. It's going to encourage compliance, obedience, and safety.
Well, yeah, it seems like they're really uncomfortable with vulnerability. And to the degree that I hear the word vulnerability thrown around a lot, and it seems like there's a lot of awareness of mental health related terms, and people but I don't think they understand it, how it relates physically. There's a real disconnect. So a lot of people I've met in social justice environments, they talk like they're well-rounded on mental health issues, and they set boundaries and they're concerned about ethics, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the times when they talk like this, when they talk about the importance of vulnerability, it doesn't match their actions. and it shows that they don't even know what they're talking about. And it just makes me think, like, Jennifer's, your whole discipline in that job situation. I mean, you said you're a licensed social worker, and so you're working with mental health, and here it is, this really dysfunctional thing invaded your territory. It's like, are the safe spaces safe? Or is that where the sharks are swimming? Is it safe for the sharks because you're the food?
Yeah, I'm so glad you guys raised this point, because it really has become a culture of safetyism. And there's a great book about it, The Coddling of the American Mind. I highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't read it. I haven't read the entire thing. I'm listening to it on Audible right now. And it's basically, this culture of safetyism is actually the opposite of what it takes to build resilience. And we know in mental health that this is not actually healthy for people. We know that if somebody has anxiety and fear, the way to conquer that is to gradually expose ourselves to it more and more until we gain confidence, gain mastery, and overcome that fear. This culture of safetyism is all telling us the opposite. Avoid anything that might be upsetting to you. And it's also basically framing upset feelings as the same thing as physical danger. And this has been taken by social justice warriors and used to manipulate people. They are weaponizing their feelings. There have been so many circumstances where somebody stands up at their workplace or their school and questions something in critical race theory and critical social justice. And the response aimed at silencing that person very often uses the same little catchphrases. This behavior was harmful. Your peers or your colleagues felt unsafe. They've been harmed by you. And so that person is being framed as dangerous as a way of delegitimizing their opinions, and it's a way of shutting people down. It's really manipulative, I think.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Absolutely. That's a very common experience in the situations I've been in, where social justice is very, very overpowered. And in my last situation last year, I even say that environment was a cult. I don't throw that around lightly. And it's really a weird situation as far as trying to define the role that this ideology plays. Is this now a religion? Is it a widespread cult ideology that tends to spur off these little bubbles that protect themselves and become more extreme? Is it both? But I mean, and even when you talk about the word harmful too, I heard a little bell in my head from listening to Benjamin Boyce, because he noticed that in a lot of the dialogue and paying attention to the situation with Evergreen and Brett Weinstein and, other issues. So now on his YouTube videos, he adds a little bell sound every time the word harmful comes up. And so now I'm a bit trained like Pavlov's dog, but I almost appreciate it, because and especially since I'm a musical creator, composer, etc. So I'm pretty sensitive to sound getting stuck in my head. So now if I'm dealing with social justice warriors, like even when I was in that workplace, you could say long drawn out struggle session last summer, and there was a whole bunch of slander against me. Every time the word harmful would come up, it's like this nasty, sickly thing where there's all these people in a nice meeting. It's very bureaucratic, but they're being completely dishonest. And the whole time there's just like these little bells in my head. Ding, 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 ding. And it's like I'm hearing Christmas music while I'm trying to stand up for myself. So it makes them look all the more ridiculous. And maybe that's a form of exposure therapy. Like people say, if you're afraid of public speaking, imagine everyone else in their underwear. So I don't know. I understand that some people are very afraid and they're not used to risk taking, or they're not used to this particular issue they're dealing with. And so maybe just start imagining SJWs dressed up like clowns when they're trying to explain their very important concerns to you. I can't take it seriously. It just sounds so fake. Like, why are you harmed by words? What? Why are you calling costume makeup blackface? Like when somebody's not even doing blackface and they're just dressed up as a character and they're wearing a fake spray tan. What is up with the world right now? I don't know. I just need to conclude we're in clown world, and you should assume that social justice warriors are clowns. But
now I'm going to be thinking about that.
just hear the little bells going ding dong, and every time you hear the word harmful.
Yeah, there's something that I don't know if you've ever heard Josh Slocum's podcast, Disaffected. He does a little bell thing too. I can't remember what it's for. I think it might be for anytime somebody kind of says something that's that exhibits cluster B traits. I think it's something like that, and goes dong dong or something. It's funny.
Yeah. Maybe we should have a bell for something. We should really throw people off. We had a spontaneous video chat on the back porch recently with a couple of us from Counterweight. That was pretty fun. And somebody on Counterweight in that video chat suggested we should really try to mess up the plans of social justice ideologues by saying, because they have this idea that there's these dog whistles. And I guess that means it's a term that secretly means something else. And usually they mean secretly means white supremacy, like the OK hand symbol or whatever. And one guy suggested that we just say all of their terms are dog whistles for white supremacy. So if you say implicit bias, then you're the white supremacist. That'd be very entertaining.
Well, it's so funny because there's so much manipulation around language in critical social justice and critical race theory. And I think that the manipulation of language is used to smuggle in ideas that if they were stated very overtly, most people of common sense and goodwill would reject the ideas. So I think they're smuggling things in. And I think we need to pay attention to that and pay attention to how the definition of words has been changing. I remember hearing on the radio years ago, I was driving and I think I might have been listening to NPR, and they were saying, oh, the definition of the word racism has changed. And instead of meaning that what at least I grew up with, that racism is making decisions based on race, believing that one race is superior to another, it's now prejudice plus power equals racism. And so therefore, since white people are allegedly the power holders, we're really the only ones who can be racist. A Black person or person of color can have prejudice, but they can't be racist according to this. And that's really a way, I think, of trying to make it such that certain people cannot be criticized, but other people are very, very easily criticized and even kind of viewed with suspicion.
Yeah. So they're weaponizing things. They want to have clearly defined categories so they can form the caste system. And so that's why a lot of social justice proponents were really mad about the Rachel Dolezal situation, where she was saying that she was Black and she's white, or she's saying she's transracial, and they don't want anything to do with that because it's breaking down their sacred categories that keep people as oppressors and oppressed. And I think it's almost like there's meta levels to this, that there's the level of power between oppressors and oppressed. So if they have the power to call you racist as a white person, that's the real power, but they want to pretend that you have the power so they can keep the narrative up. But there's a totally different level where the ideology has power if there are such a thing as oppressors and oppressed at all. They need to have these rigid categories. And I honestly think it makes no sense to call people or define people as oppressors and oppressed. It's so extreme. It's like it's dehumanizing in a very literal fashion. As if I'm an oppressor, that doesn't sound human or oppressed, either of those. It does not sound like a nuanced, multifaceted human category. And so if they lose their categories, then the ideology the whole house of cards falls down. And so they have to perpetuate things and maintain things. I don't see any real problem solving. It's an endless cycle.
It is, isn't it? It feels very reductive to me and very dehumanizing to be cast in any type of light and like that on the basis of race. Like, I know everything about you simply by looking at the color of your skin. To me, that's really a very racist idea. And I think it's really divisive. And, I feel, even though I don't work for Fairfax County anymore, and I don't live in Fairfax County anymore either. I actually live in Maryland, about 20 minutes outside of DC. I've lived in Fairfax County for many years. I still care about what happens to that county. It's a beautiful place. It's really, really nice. And I loved living there. And I feel like once this kind of social justice enters any kind of institution, it really acts as a corrosive and starts dividing people and ultimately starts breaking down the institution. And I'm really both frightened and sort of morbidly interested to see what will happen as this captures entire local governments, because that has indeed happened. And Fairfax County government has the entire government, to put it crudely, has gone woke. And I don't know if you guys have seen anything in the news, but Fairfax County public schools are now peddling this nonsense. And there have been parents, thank heavens, objecting to the school board about it. But one of my friends who has kids in the Fairfax County Public Schools sent me the proposed curriculum, which is all based on their One Fairfax social and racial equity policy. And the curriculum is shocking. It's so disturbing. I haven't read all of it yet. I could only handle this stuff in sort of dribs and drabs because I get so frustrated and upset. But basically, they are taking the approach that children absolutely must be educated in social justice, that we want the children to be activists. And part of teaching them to be activists is to teach them that America is a systemically racist country, and that all of the things that go wrong in people's interactions with the police that have, bad outcomes are evidence, absolutely, a priori of racism. And they had a whole list of resources for kids. And some of them were saying things basically like, police used to chase after runaway slaves. Therefore, the police are still operating with that mentality. And there was some article about from chasing runaway slaves to the modern day traffic stop. And they intend to use this curriculum with fourth graders. They're teaching kids to be terrified of the police, teaching Black children that the police are out to get you because of the color of your skin. So I think it's actually quite dangerous, because if I grew up hearing that, I'd be very frightened if I was pulled over by the police, and maybe I wouldn't be cooperative, and that raises the chance of things going wrong. It also is creating a lot of hatred and suspicion of the police, which is not safe for the police and not safe for communities. So it's really scary to see this getting into different counties. And I know that some people still who aren't really reading the news think, oh, this is just happening out on the West Coast. No, it's not. This is everywhere now. And just to give another little example, in Maryland, a bill went to Governor Larry Hogan, which would require all healthcare professionals, so that means doctors, nurses, anybody working in the mental health field, that they have to take implicit bias training in order to maintain their professional licensure. So they're making this ideology conditional. I mean, they're making our licenses conditional on this ideology. And I think that once you start with that, with, oh, okay, now you're going to take this implicit bias training, I think that's just the camel getting its nose under the tent. I don't think that they'll stop there. I think they'll keep pushing the ideology. And it concerns me that at some point when a doctor or therapist or nurse goes to renew their license, and we're all asked to sign statements, have you, do you have a substance abuse problem? Have you completed your continuing education units, that kind of thing, that they might have a little statement in there that people have to sign, some kind of social justice statement that violates people's conscience, and they have to sign it in order to renew their license. I see that as a distinct possibility facing professionals in the future if this continues unchecked.
Yeah, that's probably coming up in the near future, and I'm positive that it's already instituted in a kind of disconnected way, more decentralized in pockets where social justice is in a more advanced stage. And just as an example of how it's institutionalized, to use one of their terms, the organization I worked for, Lutheran Social Services, it's the second largest nonprofit in the state of Minnesota. I was totally public about all this. I sent an email to over 300 people in the network and a bunch of different organizations. And LSS instituted a commitment to anti-racism as a public statement in 2008. So they did this before Obama's first election. And some people who are less aware of the history of social justice might think that's a lot longer ago than I would have expected. But some of the people I know who are aware of social justice and its history, they got really hardcore into it in the 90s when they went to either end of high school or college. If anybody, like as an example, Unsafe Space is a YouTube channel. It's smaller, but they grew very rapidly, and it's one of my favorites online. And it's co-hosts Carrie and Carter. And Carrie is probably 40 something now. And she said for many, many years, she was a social justice proponent, very hardcore. And she actually, that was part of her job. She was in entertainment for comedy, something, and had to look for social justice approved comedy, which sounds like a terrible job, but she got into it in the 90s. I was born in 1995. I'm 26. And in my lifespan, being in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, it's Minneapolis and St. Paul, I haven't known anything different. Wow. The only break I got was when I lived in New Hampshire for a year. And social justice was a lot less present there, but you would still see it kind of pop up here and there. So it does concern me that people aren't aware of how widespread this is and how long it's been going on. And just some of the examples you give me, they're not really shocking. And but like even that school board thing or the school curriculum issues you're talking about, I wonder if concerned parents and other people in Fairfax County, if they know about the successes. There was somewhere in Texas where there was a group of parents that were ruthless in pushing back, and they got a school board elected that was very critical of social justice and basically banned it from their school system. So at least that was a really good thing that happened. That was very surprising, but maybe Texas is the place to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's encouraging that people are waking up to this. Not as quickly as I would like. I'm not a very patient person. That is not one of my that's not one of my strengths. I want this fixed, basically. But I am taking a lot of encouragement with the fact that as parents are checking into their kids' curriculums and learning what is being taught, that their parental instincts are overriding their reluctance, very understandable reluctance to speak up and maybe be smeared or canceled. It's overriding that. They're coming out, they're talking to school boards, they're talking to teachers. I think it's a great thing, and they are gaining some ground. So I think we have reason to be hopeful. I would just like it to be faster, because meanwhile, while these efforts are being made, really good people are losing their jobs. Really good people are being harassed at work or intimidated or bullied. There's a very strong bullying element to this. I think it's really quite abusive, and it's just to me, it's absolutely outrageous that an employer thinks they should have access to your unconscious to begin with. Not that I believe this test really accurately measure unconscious bias, because I do not believe that. And the science shows that it doesn't, and also shows that there's a very, very weak link, if any, between our unconscious and actions. So I think those tests are useless. But people are making big money off of their diversity, inclusion, equity stuff now. It's really it's a huge industry. Yeah, and I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. So, the people that I have met through Counterweight, the people I've been doing the listening sessions with to offer support because of what's going on in their workplace or school, these are some of the nicest, most highly principled, lovely, ethical people that I have ever met. There's not a racist among them. And it's often people that are the least racist that, of course, are so horrified at being called racist, because that's a terrible thing to be called. And they recognize that, and they're sensitive to that. And to see people being bullied at work for things that have nothing to do with their job function whatsoever. It's not your employer's job to push a particular set of views on you. Like you said, there's a kind of like a religious kind of quasi-religious cult-like element to it. It's not their job to tell them what to believe. Of course, it's your employer's job to do something if somebody actually was discriminating or doing something racist in the workplace that was behavioral, that you could actually see happening. But that's not been the case with any of the clients. They are just people who have maybe asked a question that management didn't like, or maybe they've said, hey, I really don't want to do this training. I'm uncomfortable with this. Or just, I'd like to not talk about race in the workplace. I'm happy to work with people from all different races and backgrounds. I just want to do my job. And they're being bullied and harassed. People have been taken off promotion ladders because of this. People have been given less favorable assignments. People are being given bad grades on their papers in college simply because they disagree with the professor on this stuff. And it's to me, that is just completely abusive and a violation of our rights to free speech, freedom of conscience. It's just wrong on so many levels.
Yes.
What do you think we as ordinary citizens can be doing to maybe accelerate how quickly people awaken from wokeness? You said it was maybe happening a little too slow. I remember watching gay rights happen. Decades even. It was a very slow process as people evolved and awoken. So I'm not looking for wokeness to go away anytime soon. I think it's here with us for a while probably. But what if there were a way to maybe minimize it or reduce its effect or contain it somehow? What do you think might accelerate that process? There are some practical things that people can do.
Yeah, that is such a good question. And it's something that I've been thinking about more and more. And I think that people are fighting it on different fronts in different ways, depending on their kind of skills and interest and their ability to do it. You know, all of us can tolerate different levels of risk. So I think that a multi-pronged approach is great. And so people who are going and speaking to school boards, I think, is really, really important, because this indoctrination is starting in the schools. And if people are opposing it in the schools, that's kind of pulling it out by the roots a bit. So I think that that is extremely valuable. People are also going and talking to their local government about it, getting involved with talking about policies that local governments are trying to enact. And I think that's really useful. I think speaking about it publicly is helpful. I think writing about it. I think standing up as much as a person can. And I totally understand that there are people, you know, there are people where I worked who have said to me, I would love to say something, but I can't because I'm a single mom and I'm supporting 2 kids. And this is where I get my health insurance. I can't do anything. But, you know, people can anonymously leak stuff from their trainings. They can leak that information and expose this. The more the general public becomes aware of this, I think the more the pushback will grow, and the more people will feel able to question it at work and suggest alternatives. Because, you know, there are, to give people some benefit of the doubt, and I don't really give social justice warriors much benefit of the doubt, but I will say that there are some employers that they know they're expected to do some kind of diversity training, and they don't realize that they are doing critical race theory. A lot of times they haven't even really looked at the material, and they've sort of bought a package and it turns out to be critical race theory. And there are alternative things that they could be doing. There's some resources on the Counterweight website too for alternative diversity approaches in the workplace. So I think raising awareness about that there are options, all of it helps. This podcast helps. All of it. I think Talk about it. I don't think yet that there's a critical mass of people, at least in the US, that are aware of this. I don't think my neighbors with all their Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns are aware that Black Lives Matter lists as one of its goals to dismantle the nuclear family. I don't think they know that they are actually labeled themselves as Marxists. I think there's a lot that people don't know. They hear, oh, diversity, equity, oh, that's good. And they don't look sort of behind the curtain, and they don't read thoroughly enough to know what's happening. So the more we talk about it, the more we're raising awareness.
Yeah, reveal the man behind the curtain.
That's right.
The Wizard of Oz. The more that you're talking about it's almost like we're on the edge of this breakthrough, this Woodstock, this Renaissance, where we see these ways that we're stuck at point A, we're looking at this point B we don't even imagine clearly enough, and we're seeing these little moments where there's these flashes of inspiration, these flashes of these ridiculous things, terrible things, and even amazing things. And so I've been trying to kind of grasp it, you know, what is point B and what is point C, and what are we reaching for and actually aiming for? And one of the themes that's come up recently is self-employment. It's not even just self-employment, but like helping people see they actually do have way more options than they realize. And to some degree, people get overwhelmed and bombarded with options, and they don't know how to prioritize. I remember when I was 14, my dad had a whole shelf in our fridge for mustard. It was this mustard, that mustard, this one. And I'm like, Dad, why do you have so many mustards? And he's like, I forget that I buy them. And this one looks good. And I'm like, well, but it doesn't even make any sense. 80% of them are kind of on the spicy side. Shouldn't you get a little variety in there? He's like, I don't have time to think about this. I'm like, then why? So it's like people are bombarded with too many choices that don't really matter, and simultaneously convinced they don't have choices where it does matter. And I would like to hope that there's a lot of potential and mystery and wonder that's like right in front of us that people don't give enough credit to is actually there. And just with you as an example, you said that you started a private practice within your same field, same pretty much similar type of job. So effectively, does that mean you're self-employed? And how's that going?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I wish I'd done it earlier, honestly. I mean, I miss some of my clients at the county. I had some really great clients there, so I missed that. But my private practice is thriving. It is wonderful working for myself. It's just extremely rewarding. And I think that it's really wise at this point in our culture, when so many employers are trying to indoctrinate the employees. I think it's really wise for people to have a backup plan, to have an exit plan, because you might need to use it if things get really bad. And I'm really lucky that I have something that I can do on my own, but I think that a lot of times people have strengths and skills they don't realize that they have, and they could possibly jump ship. And it's certainly good to always keep that as an option in the background. I think that one thing that we might start seeing in the US with teachers, because teachers are really, there's certain industries are hit by this harder than others, and nobody can escape it. No field escapes it, but teachers who disagree with critical race theory and critical social justice, or disagree with teaching it to children, are really in a tight spot, because administration is really going after them. But I think what we're going to start to see as parents get more concerned about this in the schools, I think that we're going to see parents grouping together and hiring teachers privately to teach their kids in sort of pods. I know some parents did that during the pandemic. And I think we're going to see more of that. So I think that strangely, out of this crisis, different opportunities are being born, and that there may be some new sort of interesting industries springing up.
Yes.
It's a very creative
it's
time.
funny.
It feels. Go ahead.
When you bringing up teachers, there's a broader umbrella for this that's been really a prominent industry, and that's youth work. And that's kind of my main thing. And so I was a youth outreach worker for at-risk youth. The widest definition for that was ages 12 to 24. And my job was mobile. And I found a way to be in a position of youth mentorship and be an example of empowerment and really emphasize self-determination. And the two main branches I emphasized were healing trauma and economic empowerment. And pretty much everything else branches off from that, if you want to simplify. And I was just really dedicated to this. So it made it all the more disgusting to me to see that industry so captured by such a dishonest, authoritarian ideology. I mean, the first social justice proponent I remember in my life was my mother. And so I grew up with it. She was a hardcore feminist. And so that was like my first introduction to it. It's not fun having your mom as a hardcore feminist as a boy. I don't recommend it. And from there, I experienced it in school, and eventually my health was bad, and I wanted to take care of my health, and nobody was taking it seriously. And so I jumped ship, and I started pursuing my own healthcare when I was 15. And I finally escaped, and I became independent when I was 17, and I got into youth transitional housing program. And years later now, I actually worked in that same network. So it's like this comes full circle. And now I have to deal with seeing my coworkers and my managers push a more advanced and dysfunctional degree of the same ideology that I escaped. And now they're pushing that on our clients. And one of the people that was the primary people coming after me, while we worked under the same boss, and I got fired and she got promoted. So that was I went all over the place with that. But you brought up teachers and the tragedy of the crisis there and how disempowering it feels and how disturbing when you first discover it, but also this opportunity that arises from that for people that decide to take on responsibility. And that's what makes the difference. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. I think it's actually one of the rules in his newest book. Opportunity lies where responsibility is abdicated. So if there's people being irresponsible and they're neglecting something and you jump in and take it on, his claim is that you can do something really magical and transformational. So a lot of the research I'm doing right now is trying to expose these youth nonprofits and related things for something that I call as a victimhood meritocracy. It's like a model. It's almost like this monster. It's a model of pushing empowerment, but it's actually a victimhood meritocracy. And I'm proposing an alternative model that's based on self-determination. So I really hope that, out of the terrible things happening, that the right people respond. And it's like you awaken the beast, you poke the tiger, and they respond.
Oh, that's
Jennifer,
so
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go, please.
Rock, paper, scissors.
This is your...
Come on, rock, paper, scissors.
No, I'm here every week. I want you to say what you want to say.
I know what I was going to say, so I want you to go.
I was just going to ask about counterweight. You had mentioned it a few times, and you had talked about the support network and the listening sessions. How does that fit into the larger mission of kind of helping people deal with social justice in their lives?
Oh, yeah. So, so it's really interesting what Counterweight does. I don't really know of any other organization that works quite in this way. When clients reach out to Counterweight, which is really easy to do, by the way, it's just counterweightsupport.com. And then you go to the menu and go to get help. And it's just this short little form you fill out, and then someone will reach out to you. So Counterweight actually helps people who are in these situations at their school or their work or university. And sometimes people want to push back. Sometimes they want to, they just want to speak to somebody because they're concerned. And Counterweight actually helps people with formulating an ethical, liberal objection to critical social justice and critical race theory. So there's sample letters that people can use to write to their employer or their school. There's advice about how to speak to your employer about this issue. And so there's sort of that strategic piece where they're helping people in a very individualized way with their particular situations, with strategizing how to deal with it. And then there's the emotional support piece, which is what the listening sessions are for, which is helping people to manage the extraordinary level of stress that they're under because of this situation. So it's really cool the way it operates. And each situation is slightly different. Sometimes people just want to not have to attend a training that's extremely upsetting to them. And so Counterweight will help them with that. Sometimes people have gotten mental health exemptions from going to a training in implicit bias. Sometimes people want to ask their employer to make that training voluntary instead of mandatory. Sometimes people want to propose to their employer, let's do an entirely different type of training. And sometimes the employers will listen, and we've had some success with helping people with that. Oh, wow. So it's really cool.
Wow. That's really good.
Helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, my situation was, I would say, futile. I don't think I mean, futile if you assume the goal is for me to keep my job or get them to back off or respect boundaries. It's like there are some circumstances where I think it's too late in the life cycle of social justice.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people use the metaphor, the snake eating its tail, but I actually see it as something that's probably more disturbing if we're going to use a different related metaphor, that it's almost like there's a bunch of mice and a couple of them get infected and they want to pretend they're a snake. And they keep adding more mice until the snake is fully formed. And it's just this chain of mice that go around and they think they're eating other mice. And then it's like there's nobody left. So then the snake falls apart. And it's just like the mice are all shooken up and they wake up from a dream. They're just like, what happened? And that's kind of how I see it when things fall apart. So it's actually even more concerning that some people in a late stage of social justice want to preserve things. They want to be self-protective. They're clinging to something for some kind of solid ground under their feet. And then there's the ideologues that want to maintain the status quo, the cult, power. It's like the more you preserve that, the more you prevent it from falling apart so that it can actually free people. So I hope that people could be open and creative and curious, and otherwise that I think there's people that get stuck in assumptions about like how something is going to be. And sometimes it's actually a source of liberation. If you allow something to fall apart, then you're free. Like in my situation, I got to that place of nothing left to lose. And I think that's unique to every person and it's internal. And when I reached that place, it really meant that I recognized everything they were threatening to take away from me didn't actually exist. So this sense of professional community and reputation and trust, that they were threatening to take that away instantaneously after all of my investment. Jennifer, as you had described, that you invested so much in your job and doing good work for so long. And in my case, they threatened to take all that away so quickly, it made it obvious to me that none of it was real in the first place. And so there was nothing they could do to get me to obey their commands or to manipulate me. And I think when a person reaches that stage of nothing left to lose, it's a real source of authentic power and they become unstoppable. So I'm really hoping that there are people that when they wake up, even if they have fear, that they reach that point of realization that they have more options. They have a source of inner power. And it sounds like you really tapped into that, and you just tapped into a source of courage and honesty. And that's really inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying in terms of there being a cycle, because I think that there's definitely different levels of this at people's workplace. Sometimes it really is kind of early phases. Sometimes it's, like I said before, the employer doesn't really understand that they're taking a critical race theory approach. And there are employers that are really open to listening, and there is something that can be done. And sometimes I think that the institution or the company has become so severely ideologically affected that it might be a situation where somebody just really has to decide, do I want to be working for an employer that is this, this ideologically captured? And for me, the answer was absolutely not. I don't care if I end up in a trailer eating cat food. That is how bad it was. I mean, everybody has we've all had, across our careers, some bosses that are nicer than others, some workplaces that are friendlier than others. But this is the first time in my life that I have ever been accused of collaborating with the police to murder Black men just because I am white. And to me, that is completely outside the range of acceptable in terms of what I will tolerate from an employer. And also, to me, what had been posted on our equity website was so racist and so despicable that I wanted to publicly denounce it in front of the entire agency, because I didn't want to be associated with it. I didn't want anybody else to think that I thought that that was okay. That's to me, that type of speaking to people that way is shameful. And I don't want to be associated with it. And I don't so much as want to click a single key on a keyboard for a company or institution that is treating people that way and views people that way. It's disgusting to me. And if those same things that were said about white people on that website were said about Black people, for example, all hell would have broken loose. And rightfully so. It's highly objectionable. And I made it clear that I would be objecting no matter what race was being attacked in this manner, because I think racism is racism, period, whatever group it's directed against. But that to me was just shocking. And I feel like with this critical race theory, there's a sort of, what is the word for it? There's this really crazy expectation that people are supposed to sit back and take it and just be told, oh, you believe in being on time, you believe in outcomes, in high performance. Oh, those are signs of white supremacy. And this is really, really racist towards white people. And I think it's also racist towards other races, because you're basically suggesting, oh, well, these are just white things and white standards. And we have to get rid of these standards because, other races couldn't possibly live up to these standards. Other races couldn't possibly be on time, couldn't possibly perform well on tests, which is really demeaning to other racists. And I think very infantilizing and quite bigoted. So
yeah,
to me, maybe a more patient person than myself could engage in a long struggle with their employer to try to get them to come to their senses. I am not that person. And part of it is because I'm 54 years old. And as you get older, your tolerance for bullshit goes down.
Oh, good.
And I was like, I'm a therapist. I went in this to help people. That's why I went into this field. That's where I want to place my energies. That's what I'm going to do. I wanted to do it here. I love my clients, but if I can't do it here without being, forced to adopt some kind of hideous ideology, I can do it elsewhere.
Yep. Yeah, I actually do see this happening relatively quickly and consistently, that where social justice has a stronghold, it is pushing away good people. And so this is something that's it's damaging to the environment, where the kind of more culty people want to gain and maintain power. But okay, I messed something up.
There you are.
I touched a button the wrong way. Okay, I'm on my phone. But so the more culty environments, they push away good people. They push away anybody that is really honest and is independent and wants to legitimately do good work. And at the same time, social justice seems to capture industries where you would think empowerment and healing and pursuing truth and one's hero's journey and pursuing high quality communities, you'd think that type of industry would be the last place where social justice would be, but it seems to be the first place, unfortunately. And I watched as everything devolved in my case, and I felt kind of this sense of acceptance as I processed it, because I could tell that someone like me being in that environment was really rare, and it doesn't usually last. Partly because I'm usually very blunt, and I also don't tolerate bullshit. I think I used up my lifetime bullshit tolerance relatively quickly. So it's like, who wants to waste their time on that? It's like you're being devalued. The more people would talk at me, and I would hear them as if they're the parents of Charlie Brown, wah, 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 the more I would just sit there and think, I've heard this maybe 1,000 times by now in my life. And it just tells me that you're devaluing me, that I'm just a placeholder. Anybody could be here and you'd be doing the same thing. So they're going to sink them. This is why it's the snake eating its tail. They're going to sink themselves into a hole because they're pushing away empowered people. They are too desperately attached to valuing victimhood. And so it's like you have to shoot yourself in the foot, and you have to degrade yourself and degrade other people to uphold this ideology. It is literally unsustainable. And I think that is one of the reasons I'm not totally jaded or pessimistic, is that the ideology is not sustainable. I don't see it maintaining itself the way other ideologies do. I do see that there's long-term effects that are really significant, but I don't see this being widespread and as dominant as they think it is. It's like they've showed their hand too soon. They're way too overconfident. And that's, it's very lucky. I mean, even me in the position I'm in now, I'm still connected to way more people, and I'm way more public about being critical of social justice than I was in childhood when I was basically born into it. So if people can manage the toxic and shocking things that they're witnessing and experiencing, then they can see that there are still good things and there are still opportunities. That's my general position.
Yeah. Wow. You made such a good point there too with good people leaving institutions. Look at the case of Paul, the teacher at Grace Church Academy in Manhattan, who spoke out against critical race theory and in the school, and now he's being painted as dangerous and could not come on the campus without permission because he'll upset the students. And I mean, it's just so ridiculous. But I didn't watch the whole thing yet, but I was watching part of his interview with Jordan Peterson, and it is obvious that he is a true educator in every sense of the word, with skill and passion and a love of teaching. And the school has lost him because of their ridiculous position that everybody has to accept this ideology and it must not be questioned. I think, that this whole, this social justice, this critical social justice thing we have going in our culture right now enables a lot of people with very little talent or skills to rise without really having anything of value to offer. But it's very clear to me that in a lot of workplaces, you could have a very mediocre employee, but if they mouthed this stuff, they would be much more likely to be promoted than somebody who was hardworking, skilled, talented, but more independent thinking and didn't agree with this ideology. And that is really part of what's so corrosive to institutions that adopt this. And that's why I think you're right. This is not sustainable. I think this is going to sort of collapse under its own weight.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we open it up to any audience members that want to participate today. We're coming up on the hour-and-a-half mark. So if anyone's in the YouTube comments or watching on social media and you want to join us to hang out with Jennifer or participate in the discussion, just comment or email us at jeffandnemo@gmail.com and we'll get you the link and get you on the Zoom. And it takes a certain sensibility to not clash with social justice or to clash with it. And when I'm around it, it gets triggered right away. I hope there's enough people with my sensibility that eventually, as this thing spreads, they're gonna either logically or rationally it's gonna clash, or just emotionally it's gonna clash with their sensibility. But maybe we have lost the culture war. We are the minority. Like maybe this is the future, and maybe their sensibility is different, whatever constitutes a sensibility. But the reaction I get when I'm confronted with it is completely different than the emotional reaction they get when they're confronted with it. And to me, it happens so instantaneously and right away. I don't even have to think about it to know that this stuff is either unintelligent or manipulative. It's propaganda. It's up to something no good. And they experience a completely different emotional feeling when they're confronted with the same. So I don't know if we have. I don't know if there's enough of us going forward, or with the sensibility to kind of recognize this for what it is, because it just sits with us wrong. People seem to get absorbed. I watch so many. This is the biggest mystery of social justice to me. I watch so many highly intelligent people, like teachers, critical thinkers, academics, philosophers, just get swept up into this so uncritically, and they normally are the people I would turn to for when I want wisdom or a really critical eye, or really intelligent feedback. And there's like this little Achilles heel or blind spot that they're just swallowing it. And that's where it kind of catches my eye, is why it's capturing so many people that I would think would be immune to it just from their high intelligence.
Yeah. I think there's a thread of nihilism, particularly the loss of value and meaning with some of the stereotypical ways that people would assume is a good life to pursue, what you might call the American dream. And I know myself and a lot of people around me don't really find any particular meaning in pursuing a career and marrying someone and having kids and buying a house. So that type of lifestyle seems really boring to me, honestly. And I think a lot of people, we got so inundated with go to college, go to college, go to college, go to college, stay in school as a kid. And so many of us, and then our life, I've said this too many times in the podcast, but this might be the first time Jennifer's hearing it. And for a lot of us, we in school, being hyper sheltered, our experience with the outside world was through these historical stories. So I know so many people around me that almost romanticize and fetishize the civil rights era. And all they really can imagine and how to be is an activist. And that's all they know. And they their value system seems to be really messed up. And I've even discovered this thing where you could say, these are the values I have, but maybe that's the values you wish you had, and you actually have some bad habits, and it's more of a physical process than you realize. It's like, okay, you value waking up at 8 a.m. every day and being productive, but are you actually waking up at 8 a.m. every day and being productive? Maybe you have physical habits and mental habits, and you have a chaotic lifestyle and a lack of routine and a lack of discipline. The school system doesn't help with that. So I think a lot of people, they have the values they wish they had and the values they're stuck with, and they don't understand how to change that. They may not even be aware of what's happening, like what I'm describing. And on top of that, they romanticize things like the civil rights era. So it's like their whole value system is completely upside down. And it's like the foundation of this messed up value system I see is often devaluing your own choices. It's not that important or valuable, and valuing everything out here. And that leads people to try to be controlling of others, which doesn't make any sense, because who's doing the controlling? You. So then are your choices that unvaluable? So now it's a paradox. So I admit that was probably too much to throw out there all at once, but my whole point is their value system sucks, doesn't make any sense, and they're not even aware of it. And that's my rant for the day.
That was a good rant.
CRT appeals to. I'm reading comments.
Somebody in our comments?
Yeah, CRT. We have a comment. CRT appeals to highly educated people's pride.
Oh, and you
Yeah.
know what in terms of that, I think there's some I a lot of people believe that CRT is a continuation of the civil rights movement. And if you are a lifelong left-leaning liberal, then you begin to you trust that to always be good and to always have people's best interest at heart and to sort of be the champion of the little guy, so to speak. And so without looking into it too deeply, people don't realize that critical race theory is not a continuation of the civil rights movement. It is a 180 reversal away from it. James Lindsay does a great explanation of that on his New Discourses podcast. So I think there's a lot of people that have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, well, if a Democrat in office has said it, if Biden's saying we should have critical race theory, oh, it must be a good thing because it's a Democrat. But have they really read any critical race theory? Have they really, really exposed themselves to it? Because some of these people where I think it just kind of it goes along with how they wish to see themselves, but they realize that the left that they grew up with maybe has shifted, or the left that their parents grew up with has shifted drastically and is not, the Democratic Party is no longer recognizable as what it once was. I grew up a lifelong Democrat. Now, not until they come to their senses, to put it crudely.
It did shift, or is shifting, or is in the process of, but I don't feel like our side of the party speaks up. I don't know if it's a vocal minority. It seems like it is, but they're making an awful lot of progress. But I don't feel like the rest of the party speaks up loudly enough against it and say, these are not our values. These are not the democratic values that represent us. We kind of just let them hang out in the big tent with everybody else, and they're wreaking havoc everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's the majority of Americans that agree with this stuff. I think people are either not fully aware, or they are frightened into silence. But I don't believe the vast majority of Americans buy into this.
It's really hard to say which it is and where on the spectrum it would be, because I'm starting to question if my lifetime experiences in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, to how that compares to other areas in the US. And especially since I talk to people internationally in counterweight and in other groups, and more, I get more insight. And then I talk to my friends and I listen about their family history and what it was like to talk to their grandparents and try to get context. And the more I try to do that, the more I'm convinced, I would bet at least $50, the big 50, that the Twin Cities is one of the world's epicenters of social justice. So even though you could say a lot of people aren't aware of what they're buying into and what they're parroting, that there's these weird layers, I also see that if you're trying, the thing is, okay, if you're going to be ideological and you want to trick people into things, to some degree, that's a trade-off. You're taking a risk in that you might get them to believe something and then parrot something that you didn't intend. So if there's this large layer of people that are parroting popular social justice and don't understand the really academic parts of it that James Lindsay gets into, I would say if that's the largest group, it's almost as if that's more what social justice is than the academic-y stuff. But the academic-y ideologues almost don't even care, because all they care about is pulling the puppet strings. So I see all these people around me where there's this constant virtue signaling that you have to say, somebody says the right words, or somebody brings up this sensitive topic of race or whatever, and then everyone else has to parrot the exact phrase, and then everybody kind of nods in agreement. or whatever. And I see that constantly, or people just throwing out statements that are insane as if that's obvious. Like police brutality is this crisis and it's a public health issue for Black people across the United States. I hear that statement all the time. And that's such a dramatic and extreme claim. That's like, that would take a lot of work to prove at all. But things like that are common where I am with people around me. And it's the people that are apologetic, that seem to believe in it, that are allowing this stuff to continue on. So it's, I mean, James Lindsay talks about how reality itself is harder to determine now. So it's hard to determine what's real.
Yeah, I mean, when you manipulate the language the way it's been manipulated, that has a disorienting effect on people. And when the mainstream media is so clearly a propaganda machine, that also is, I mean, it's just essentially spreading misinformation and viewing things through a critical social justice lens, instead of just giving people the facts and letting us all come to our own conclusions. They're basically telling us what we have to think.
Yeah. And that comes back to that's the side I experience, is the authoritarianism of it. Who are you to tell me to inform me of reality? Like, where is your authority? Where do you get the authority to educate me? We're two adults living in society together, and you're assuming this authority, you have this enlightenment that you're going to presume to educate me. And so that's a little bit of the authoritarian side of it that I experience a lot. But also it reminds me of religious Christianity, and like particularly like on Saturday mornings when the Mormons come to your door and they proselytize and they want to give the speech and the little pamphlet. And it reminds me of interactions with those types of Christians. Not all Christians, but the really aggressive evangelical ones or proselytizing ones. And that's the other parallel that I draw, is interacting with religious people. The discussions are similar. You kind of hit this ideological wall where your terms they're not even referring to the same thing. There's no use going forward into a discussion. And then you hit that what I just described, that experience, that sensation of interacting with them, that kind of smug
righteousness.
Yeah, but it's also like an intellectual righteousness as well. Like these are not college professors. Some of these are teenagers that watch, I don't know what they watch these days, MTV, or they're college students. They're not people that have any particular authority to educate me in this matter, but they insist that they have one, or they assume one for themselves, and then they become really obnoxious.
Well, a lot of people, all they know to take cues from that they've been immersed in socially, their dialect, even, you could say, it's really from the school system. And the end of the school system, you could say, is college. And I know so many friends of mine that after high school, when they went to college, all of these traits that were already bad in school, like this academic snobbiness that has no basis in reality, it's all theoretical. And it's like they're not even really aware of how absurdly snobby and pushy they are with other people. Like it's like we're all kindergartners. Like they have this audience of kindergartners constantly that they're just teaching. It's like I don't even want to teach kindergartners that way. Okay, kindergartners want to play. So it's like, what are they trying to do? But it's almost like that's the only experience they have. And I've had friends that after going through college, those traits it's not like it started in college, but it got worse. And so like what you're trying to describe here, this kind of academic snobbiness, it's people that seem to overvalue the mind above everything else and the theoretical. And as a weird reaction to being sheltered, they seem to look down upon the real world. They look down upon like blue collar people. I had a couple of friends in high school that ended up going very different directions. And one of them went blue collar and he's a welder. The other one went to college and he's an academic. And they were both like some of my closest friends for quite a while. But the academic person, after college, he had like a total breakdown. And it was an ugly situation. And then he started calling our welder friend a white supremacist. And I'm like, between the two of you, my welder friend interacts with people of color a lot more every single day because he works with people of all different races. It's like this, it's this naive snobbiness. It's like ignorant snobbiness. It's, I know better than thou, and they don't. And it's like, it's a big mess.
Yeah, it's irritating. That's where I end up fighting the most. Like most of my encounters with social justice on the street, on the ground, have been those types. And that's really where I'm motivated to really fight back, when they start that obnoxious, condescending, patronizing attitude. It's like I don't know, we can get away with saying on YouTube, so I'll skip that part. But anyway,
we'll have to use our imaginations. I just imagine like a superhero comic with like a really ripped Jeff in a cape, and there's all these like social justice proponents dressed as clowns, and he's just taking them all out.
But they are like, I don't find them challenging at all. Intellectually, they're not a challenge when they start. Like I'm constantly mystified as why people keep getting taken in by this. They're not. Their arguments are not sound or valid. Their logic, their sense. You don't have to go very far into it to notice the breakdown in reason. And
I don't think they care.
They're not they are clowns to me. I don't know why people are intimidated by them. They're like little children playing, like when you're babysitting children and they're like, hey, let's play this game we made up, and they lead you through this little pretend world in this game, and you indulge them and you oh, okay, we'll play the game. But they don't have the upper hand. Like the power's not with them. And that's how I feel about social justice. It's like me indulging a child's game or a child's sense of the world. I don't find them threatening or intimidating or challenging or anything like that. And I'm surprised. I'm amazed at how other people just capitulate to them so easily. They're bullies. And when you stand up to the bully, they stop bullying.
It very much is bullying, and it's also an extremely anti-intellectual movement. Yeah. And it's ironic to me that it's often presented as we need to have uncomfortable conversations or difficult conversations. And they're never conversations, because a conversation is an exchange of viewpoints and ideas. What this is a group of people dictating how you are to think and trying to bully and intimidate you into agreeing and shaming you if you do not. So these are not conversations. And it's concerning, because the fact that it's infiltrated the schools is very worrying, since kids are being indoctrinated in it. And the fact that it's that it has drastically infected training for psychotherapists, and it's changing the way therapists approach therapy, because some therapists now are being trained that your job is to help clients to see how their internal problems are actually due to their position on the hierarchy of oppression, and that you're essentially your job is to try to convert your clients into a form of social justice, critical social justice activism. And, some of the clients that I see at Counterweight cannot find themselves a regular therapist, depending on where they're living, because all the therapists in their area may have gone woke. And so people go to see a therapist and say, hey, this terrible thing has happened to me at work. I disagreed with something in diversity training, and I was called a white supremacist, or I was humiliated by being told that I have white privilege and that I need to be silent and not speak because I'm trying to center my own experience, and I'm feeling abused by this. And then their therapist engages in further abuse by trying to convert them and saying, well, you're just struggling to accept your privilege, or you're being defensive about your whiteness. And it's, I think there's quite an urgent need for.
Are there online options
for training
for therapy?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Part of the problem is with licensure, you might be able to find, let's say you live in Portland, you're going to have a difficult time finding a non-woke therapist. So maybe you'd like to talk to a therapist in a sort of less woke, so to speak, state. Well, that therapist would have to be licensed also in that state. And no therapist is licensed in all the states. Licensure is by state. So it's actually blocking people's access to services. It's, I mean, can you imagine? Oh, this is another little thing. I saw this thing on Twitter. This doctor was advocating that you need to talk to your patients about racism. You talk to them, you talk to the adults about racism to make sure that they're not holding any racist ideas, racist in the newfangled sense of racist, and talk to them. If you're a pediatrician, talk to your parents about how to make sure you're raising anti-racist children. This has been adopted by the medical profession as well.
Yeah.
So I don't want to end on a depressing note.
Yeah. There's two things that I've been thinking of throughout this conversation that kind of come up as something that's encouraging and exciting. And just thinking, especially since Jeff was asking about, how do you get therapy? I've certainly had woke therapists. It's very unpleasant. And I'm wondering if it sounds like CTA is so active and so passionate. I've always had good experiences and heard great things through CTA. So it makes me think that there could be this growing network that then, to just at least cope properly, effectively with the state licensing complications, you could categorize people by their location and say, well, if you're in this state, at least we know here are some therapists that are offering services, blah, 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 whatever, through this state. And so at least we could start to build up that momentum. Because CTA is one of the most active groups I've seen in the counter movement, at least in the circles that I'm more connected to. And so that's really exciting. And the other branch of this that I really want to try to help people with and try to get people to discuss these issues and try to experiment, to actually take some of this into their real lives and go out and experiment and see what happens, is around self-employment and trying to explore options with relating to employment and not just assume that you're stuck. Yeah. Like, I think that's relevant for a multitude of reasons. Inflation in the US is already bad. 35% of the money that exists in computer systems, as little numbers, or physically in the US, was printed in 2020. So it's like the economic issues beyond social justice are a huge problem. But anyways, just thinking of like those two branches, trying to create therapy that's accessible, that's trustworthy and non-woke, as well as helping people with employment issues. Like, Jennifer, are you seeing some good successes relating to those things?
Yeah. So first off, critical therapy antidote, CTA. We are working on developing a directory of non-woke therapists, and by that I mean that therapists that are not going to try to use critical race theory or critical social justice to indoctrinate the clients, and where the therapy is non-ideological. So, and therapy should be non-ideological and non-political. We are not there to convert our clients. So we are working on developing that. We need more therapists who are interested in being listed. Ideally, we would like to be able to have therapists all over the US that are readily accessible to people. I think that for me, I'm lucky. Self-employment has been really successful. I think it's great to start doing some preparation in advance. I had, when I left my job, I had started several months earlier, thinking that this was becoming untenable. And I had already signed up for insurance panels so that I can accept insurance for clients. So I was already laying a bit of a groundwork for myself, and that made it easier to just step straight into an alternative form of employment.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And
so, I mean,
anyone looking for a therapist can email CTA. It's criticaltherapyantidote@gmail.com. And they can informally search the network for you and put the word out and see if there's a therapist that matches your needs. So for now, you can just email and we'll help you locate one if we can find one.
Yep. And you know, as far as self-employment and dealing with employment options, I mean, Jeff, you're a peer counselor and you've been trying to build up the back porch. And there's other peer counselors that help run the back porch still. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have options. It's just a matter of continuing to get the word out there that we have support systems for people that are developing. And I found, I mean, even just one person that's like the right person or a decent person to have that connection socially, have that support. And, you know, as Jennifer said, the peer support through Counterweight is offered as listening sessions. Those things are really powerful to help people who are in a chaotic space that maybe aren't being listened to at all. So if people feel stuck or they want to explore self-employment and other options, or they want to pursue a project that has meaning in the world and purpose and that has concrete, real impact, they really should like get involved in some of the groups we're in, like the Back Porch, Counterweight, CTA or Critical Therapy Antidote, and, you know, come on our podcast. We're really trying to get people to be like, make this a really community oriented thing. And we
have Critical Crossroad. We have a Discord server too called Critical Crossroads, and that's another one we're kind of using as a hub to coordinate everything.
Yeah, Critical Crossroads. Jeff kind of started it casually, and it's a nice place where there's a lot of overlap between a lot of these different groups. So it gets a little confusing. There's so many groups, but
part of that's the decentralization, because we're consciously adopting and embracing a decentralized model. So we're going to have all of these smaller little cellular groups connected to this larger network, because the Critical Crossroads Discord server originally started as a CTA Discord server that kind of spun off and became its own thing, which is happening a lot in CTA. CTA is kind of like the hub where we meet each other and then we spin off and form our own little sub communities from there. But it's kind of the same group of people, and we still interact and network and keep referring to each other. So I think continuing to grow that community, get the larger general community bigger, and then from there we can start developing these smaller decentralized groups for whatever purpose, and we can do a self-employment one.
Yeah, I think that's how we're all going to survive this emotionally, is by supporting each other, and economically by helping each other, supporting each other, forming communities.
I think so. It reminds me of growing up gay. You came out of the closet and you looked for other people that were gay or allies, people that were supportive, and you found each other and you formed this little kind of sub community within the larger community. And this reminds me of the same thing. You have to find the people that are like you now. People have to come out as against this. You have to find each other. You have to form a support community based on this new value that unites you.
Yeah. Yeah, you've mentioned that before as a parallel. And that's why I use the metaphors of like, this is a Woodstock, or this is a Renaissance. And like, I just got a camper van very haphazardly. I won it in an auction, and it's in Georgia. I had to go down there and flounder around and deal with that. And we ran out of time before we ran out of money. So now I got to go back and get it from Georgia still. And so but van life is something that's like a big deal right now. And I think there's more people that are looking at getting camper vans and at least traveling or living in it. So there's all these little threads that seem almost chaotic and unrelated, but I actually think they're coming together. And I really want to see people kind of look at all the puzzle pieces, or look at it like as a buffet. Pick and choose what you want to see in your own life and be an example for other people. And that alone can be really inspiring. So if there is anybody out there listening to us,
creativity too. People are going to really have to tap into their creativity as a resource. And I think self-employment can be part of that as people develop creative options for income and staying employed.
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson talks about having a really solid, in-depth understanding of a problem before you can effectively come up with solutions. That people don't want to dwell on the problem. So when I look at these situations and there's a terrible circumstance or a crisis, and you see the opportunity within it, that's that process. People seeing a problem, and that means that there are unmet needs, and you could form self-employment and other work-related opportunities and whole organizations to meet those needs of people that are being antagonized by social justice. So like a self-employment support service, that's already a thing that's very necessary.
I was already doing that kind of work in my last job anyway with disability clients. So I'm a huge proponent of that, entrepreneurship and self-employment.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody sign up. Sign up for Jeff's peer support, self-employment. Let's make it happen. And then we'll send you to Jennifer afterwards as peer support for counterweight. Or maybe, no, I got it backwards. We got to start with Jennifer. See if you can save yourself in your workplace. And then when all hope is lost, you go to Jeff and you
I think it's I think there's forking paths everywhere. And we have enough of a network, because welcome to decentralization. And we have enough of a network to navigate, help people navigate through the burrow that we're creating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting. My final answer is we start with Jennifer, see if you can save your workplace, and then we go to Jeff and you go with self-employment. And then if all hope is lost, you go to me and I show you how to live in a camper van in the woods.
Yeah, I might go to you soon too. But Jennifer is a great place to start. Counterweight is a great place to start if you're having trouble. Go to their website. You can fill out their form. And our Critical Crossroads Discord is also a good starting point. A lot of people are branching out from there to the whatever space that resonates with them. And Counterweight also has a Discord. So I think between the Counterweight website, either joining their Discord and or filling out a help form, and maybe the Critical Crossroads Discord server, you can kind of explore everything else from there and find your own path through.
Yep, and find community.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I really do. And other people have said it before, and I totally agree that right now we're at the stage of just finding the people, just gathering as many of us as there are, finding them, getting the numbers up. And from there, we can start to develop into some kind of active community.
Yeah, one step at a time. I hope that we see Jennifer come around maybe the back porch, talk about self-employment.
Or as a guest on the podcast, or she's definitely an active participant in the weekly Zooms that we do. Mm-hmm. They started out that's another thing that started out as part of CTA, and now are kind of open to anybody that's struggling with critical social justice. So that's another opportunity, but they can get through that through the Discord too. Mm-hmm. So I think the Discord's still a good starting point. Yeah, Critical Crossroads. That's kind of where there's a lot of overlap. So the name fits. Third space, third place. Can you imagine how confused all these social justice people would be if they start finding all these groups with the word critical in it? That'll be fun. They didn't invent criticism. That came from Greece. Yeah. Like a lot of the other things they accuse of being white culture or white supremacy. Yeah. Jennifer, is there anything that's inspiring you that you want to say at the end of the show? Any public service announcements?
I will say that I feel very inspired by you guys. You guys are great at forming community. It is wonderful. And I'd like to tell everybody that when you stand up for what you believe in, you tend to meet other people that stand up for what they believe in, and you go on an adventure and you meet some of the best you've ever met in your life. And it's a wonderful thing. And I highly encourage people to, live according to your values.
Jennifer, I have a quick question from somebody in the comments. They're recommending that people in stable careers consider also having a side hustle. She says, or they say, quick question for Jennifer. Where do you see public sentiment turning against the ideas of individualism, individuality fitting into our present cultural moment? There seems to be this shift or turn against the idea of the individual.
Yeah, there really is. That's exactly, I think that's exactly what one of my biggest problems with critical social justice and critical race theory is that it doesn't view people as individuals. It views in a very objectified, dehumanizing manner. It views us as a series of identities. Oh, you're a white person or you're a black person. And then based on that, there's all kinds of meanings that I'm going to attribute. And I think it's horribly unfair. And I think that this is part of the understanding of critical race theory and critical social justice. Some of it's informed by Marxist thought, which is very anti-individual. And, there's also strains of postmodernism running through it. So the whole thing has an anti-intellectual, anti-individual flavor to it. And I don't think that most people who are just sort of on the edges of being a critical social justice warrior, I don't know that they fully realize that. And, just a great example of this, the hypocrisy of this is, I forget her name, Patrice something Coolers, she's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. She just spent over $3 million on mansions. So we want everybody else to sort of collectivize, and everybody else is going to share all their resources. But I myself am going to go, purchase mansions. It's just hogwash, and don't be fooled by it. Do some reading about this, I would say, before you buy into it. Do some reading. Don't just, read, read the books that everybody's telling you to read so that you can know what's out there. Like you can read your Ibram X. Kendi and your Robin DiAngelo, but then read some other, it's still on. Okay. Sorry. But then listen to some podcasts, listen to new discourses, check out REO magazine.
Yeah.
Explore your different ideas.
Because there really are at least two approaches or paths to, I guess, anti-racism. And just because someone is opposed to critical social justice does not make them a racist. So at least become aware of the few basic approaches that are out there and quit demonizing people that take an approach different from yours. I guess that could apply to us too. Except we're seeing actual harm and damage and all the stuff that it is doing. People are losing jobs, friends, communities, their sense of reality, sanity.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like to associate myself with labels that are it's like an anti-definition. They're anti-concepts. It's like they're focused on what they don't want in the world. And I think they're doing that deliberately. But even if you do it with, you could say, good intentions, just to share a few quotes, some of my favorite of all time from the founder of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg. First one is, if you seek to get rid of something in the world, it leads to violence. The second one is, saying what you don't want does not make it clear what you do want. So I don't really want to ever associate myself with phrases like anti-racism.
Yeah.
It's just not a functional way to use language. It's either manipulative or it's unintentionally dysfunctional. Because people, like even people that are critical of authoritarianism, a lot of times those of us with that personality type become critical of the government. And so some of those people will become, you could say, anarchists, anti-government. But a lot of those people I've met spend all their time focusing on the thing they don't want. So it's a very disempowered and self-corrupting way to move about in the world. And that's why our show ideally is not just here complaining about social justice. We want to encourage people to get curious about what their actual values are. What is your philosophy? What is your values? What's something that you encounter in life that's inspiring or wondrous or mysterious and interesting to you, so that people know what they actually value. So then when social justice attacks it, you know what you actually have to lose and not just what you're fighting against.
Oh, beautiful.
That is, Nemo. I know you had said you had to leave on time today or something. We're about 20 minutes over so far, so I think that's a perfect note to end on. If you want to,
that's a good positive note.
Yeah, sure. That's a good ending spot. I guess my public service announcement is don't have too many mustards in your fridge.
Word live by.
Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Oh my gosh, you guys too. You guys are awesome.
Well, I hope that we see you around in the community again, or continuing forward. And I'm going to try and hop on a CTA meeting once in a while.
Oh, that'd be great.
And we're going to start doing more activities either on the back porch and or the Discord. Nemo, me and Neil have been hanging out regularly on the Discord server for other people that want to hang out with us. So we're going to be doing more of stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Jeff, you got anything else you want to throw out there, or should we wish the people a good day and a merry life?
Not that I can think of. Jeff and Nemo at gmail.com is our contact address. You can reach out for any questions or comments or requests. Nemo, you had a form you were circulating where if people had projects or they wanted to work on.
Yeah, I can post that in the comments later too.
Okay.
I'll figure it out. Yeah, but we call it the suggestion box. It's just a nice little way if somebody has an idea for a project or something a little more concrete, or they want to see it gain momentum, you want to see the rubber hit the road, or host a more structured event, or particular topic discussion on the back porch, or whatever they want to do, they can fill out our little suggestion box, and we can help connect them to specific people or whatever group, and see. It's a little more organized. It's not hyper organized. Things are very chaotic, but we got that little suggestion box form, and if people hop on Critical Crossroads, they can kind of just intermingle however they see fit, and they can fill out that form if they like.
Okay, and people can email, I guess just email the same address, jeffandnemo@gmail.com, and we can send you one. Kat just posted a cute little mustard joke in the Discord. Okay, well, I'm not wanting this to end, but I guess it has to. So we'll be here next week again, and like I said, we have all those other activities throughout the week that seem to be getting off the ground in various degrees. So there'll be plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, don't let me hold you guys back. If any of you want to jump on the back porch or on Discord or whatever, I'm just waiting for my ride. So
that's what I'll do. I will open the back porch after this if it's not already open, and keep it open for a little while and hang out there if anybody wants to continue an interaction.
Yep. I'll get home at midnight, and you and Kat will still be making mustard jokes. Okay. I'll see everybody later.